Osama bin Laden, a name tied to fear and violence around the world. He planned attacks that shook countries, and for 10 years, he was the most hunted man alive. But behind the news and the chase, he still had a daily life. He woke up, he prayed, he ate plain meals, he wrote notes, worked in a garden, and taught his children inside high walls. So, what did Osama bin Laden actually do all day? Not the attacks everyone knows about, but the hours in between, the habits, the rules, and the quiet moments of a man hidden from the world. Was his mind always on war? Or was his daily life smaller, stranger, and more ordinary than people might think? Osama bin Laden didn't wake to alarm clocks or sunlight through big windows. His mornings in hiding began with prayer. Even as the most wanted man in the world, the first Islamic prayer before dawn set his day. He rose early, often before 5 a.m., quietly reciting while the house around him stayed dark. Guards and family knew his routine. It was the one part of life that never changed. Even when American drones flew above, even when messengers whispered about raids in other towns, the day still began with prayer. There was no rich breakfast waiting. His food was plain, bread, honey, sometimes eggs or milk from goats kept inside the walls. He ate little and often alone. He believed too much food made the body weak, and weakness was something he could not risk. He rarely left his room in those early hours. Instead, he sat on the floor, papers spread around him, sometimes reading old letters or looking at reports brought the night before. The world outside hunted him with planes and spies, but inside his walls, his mornings looked simple: prayer, tea, silence. Bin Laden's mornings shaped the rest of the day. Simple, strict, built on faith and fear at the same time. Because when you live as the most wanted man on earth, the first question each morning isn't what to win. It's whether you'll make it to the night. Osama bin Laden's days were not ruled by clocks, but by prayer. 5 times every day without fail. Wherever he lived, a cave, a mud house in Waziristan, or the tall-walled compound in Abbottabad, everything stopped when it was time to pray. He washed before each prayer, following the steps with care. His family joined him, sometimes in the same room, sometimes in smaller groups. For bin Laden, these prayers were more than religion. They were order. They were the rhythm that held his life together when everything else felt unsure. Between prayers, he often recited verses of the Quran aloud, repeating them for hours. He spoke like a teacher, correcting mistakes, asking his children or wives to repeat after him. In those quiet times, he was not just the leader of Al-Qaeda, he acted as a guide, even a teacher of faith. But prayer wasn't only about belief. It was also part of how he saw himself. He used religion to explain his role, to give meaning to his hiding, and to defend the violence done in his name. Messengers later said much of his advice was written in religious words, quotes, warnings, and calls to duty. The image mattered. Even while hiding, bin Laden wanted to be seen as more than a fighter. He wanted to be a man of faith. And inside his houses, that meant long hours of prayer, reading, and reminders that belief came first even before food or rest. In a world where he trusted almost nothing, prayer was the one thing he never doubted. Osama bin Laden didn't use phones. He didn't use email. He didn't even trust radios. He believed American satellites could hear almost anything. So his world ran on paper and on the men who carried it. Every few days, a messenger came to the house. He never stayed long. He took a folded note or left one and disappeared again into the web of safe houses and roads. These men were bin Laden's link to the outside world. Through them, he stayed tied to Al-Qaeda, even while hiding in silence. The letters were written with care, often by hand, sometimes typed, always checked. They were filled with details, reminders about safety, warnings against phones, orders about money, and advice on attacks. He used secret names for people and places, but the style was short and clear. He wanted updates on everything from how often fighters moved houses to where they kept their SIM cards. He worked slowly, sometimes hours on one page. He fixed words, rewrote lines, even drafted replies for others. Each letter had to be exact, because it could take weeks before an answer came back. The US later called it a paper trail. But inside the walls, it was more like lifeblood. These pages kept the group alive, one folded note at a time. Bin Laden's days often ended as they began, not with meetings, not with speeches, but with notes sealed in an envelope, passed to a man at the door. In a world where his voice could no longer travel, the courier became his echo. Osama bin Laden's world shrank to 4 walls. No deserts, no battlefields. Just courtyards, gardens, and locked gates. The Abbottabad compound in Pakistan, where he spent his last years, looked plain from the outside, but inside, it was built for secrecy. The walls were tall, about 18 feet high, barbed wire on top. Windows were small, some covered with sheets. There were no phone lines, no internet. Even trash was burned, so no one outside could guess who lived there. Life inside was simple. Meals were plain: rice, lentils, bread, and vegetables from the small garden. Chickens walked in the yard, goats gave milk. There were no luxuries, no fine plates, just enough to get by. The house was crowded with family wives, children, even grandchildren. They cooked, cleaned, read, and played inside the walls. The children never left. They could not go to school or play with neighbors. Their world was the courtyard and the rooftop, where laundry hung in the wind. Bin Laden followed a strict routine. He walked in the garden, sometimes for exercise, sometimes to think. He read newspapers brought by messengers. He watched news recordings. He studied books on history and religion. His world was closed off, but his mind stayed fixed on the outside. For all the fear he created abroad, inside the walls, his life was strangely plain: small meals, family noise, scribbled notes, the sound of sandals on stone paths. But every small moment carried risk, because one mistake, one slip in secrecy, could bring the world crashing through those walls. Inside the compound, Osama bin Laden was more than a man on the run. He was also a father, and he took that role very seriously. His children and grandchildren lived under the same roof, and since they could not leave for school, he became their teacher. He taught religion, reciting verses and making them repeat until they learned. He gave writing tasks, checked their work, and demanded discipline. Books filled the rooms not just on faith, but also history, war, and world events. Learning was part of every day, and he expected his children to follow his strict order. His rules were strong. He told his wives and children what to eat, how to act, even how to spend their free time. He banned television, toys with faces, and anything he thought was wasteful. Yet, he also wrote short notes to his wives, giving advice, reminders, and sometimes kind words. These scraps showed another side of his life, a man very controlling, but still tied to his family. He spoke often about patience, faith, and sacrifice. To his children, he wasn't just the figure on the news. He was the man who checked their lessons, walked with them in the courtyard, and prayed beside them 5 times a day. But fatherhood in hiding came with a cost. The children could not leave the walls, could not meet friends, could not live freely. Their world was closed by his choices. To them, he was both a guide and a guard, and every lesson carried the weight of the life he had built outside. For most leaders, power meant full rooms, councils, speeches, rallies. For Osama bin Laden, it meant the opposite. His meetings were paper, not people. From his hiding places, he ran Al-Qaeda through letters carried by messengers. He read reports about money, safe houses, and new recruits. He sent back advice on attacks, warnings about safety, and rules for how his men should live. But he rarely saw his commanders in person. Direct contact was too risky. This made for a strange rhythm. Weeks could pass between a question and his answer. Fighters in Yemen or North Africa might wait months to hear back from him. Still, his words carried weight. They were copied, repeated, and treated almost like holy text by those who followed him. Bin Laden didn't just give orders. He often rewrote them. He scolded sloppy work, warned against mistakes, and pushed for big, symbolic strikes instead of small, local ones. To him, Al-Qaeda had to stay global, not turn into just a regional group. His notes showed how much he wanted control. He gave advice on training, fundraising, even media use. He told followers not to post videos online without approval. He even set rules for how fighters should dress and act, worried that anything un-Islamic would weaken their image. And yet, his command was slower, weaker, and more limited than before. While he paced courtyards in Pakistan, younger leaders elsewhere were making choices without him. Bin Laden led an empire of shadows. But his meetings were silent, folded into envelopes, carried by trusted hands, sent out one letter at a time. Inside the compound, daily life followed Osama bin Laden's rules, strict, unusual, and often tiring. He controlled almost everything, from what people ate to how they used electricity. Lights were used only when needed. At night, curtains had to be pulled tight, so no light showed outside. Children were told not to make noise in the courtyard that might carry over the walls. Even laundry had to be hidden from view. Bin Laden was obsessed with secrecy. He banned phones, televisions, and radios. He ordered his children never to go outside the walls, not even to school. If a ball went over the fence, it stayed there. He told the women never to wave from windows. Visitors never came unless a trusted messenger had arranged it. He also made personal rules. He told his family to grow food in the garden: cucumbers, cabbages, and potatoes, so they didn't depend on markets. He kept rabbits in the yard for meat, but also sometimes watched them with the children. He raised bees in small boxes. He wanted fresh milk from goats, which were kept inside the walls like extra family members. He demanded obedience, but he was also deeply involved in small details. He checked children's schoolwork. He scolded them if they wasted paper. He told the women how much firewood to use for cooking. He reminded everyone to cut power when not in use, afraid extra usage might be noticed. Life under his roof was quiet, strict, almost like a closed-off school. But that quiet carried tension. Every small choice, when to hang laundry, when to turn on a light, felt risky. To the outside world, he was a ghost. Inside, he was the keeper of rules so strict that even a child's laughter had to be controlled. Osama bin Laden looked strong in public. Tall, thin, dressed in robes, but in private, his health shaped much of his day. Years of hiding had worn him down. He had kidney problems, stomach pain, and long periods of weakness. Often, he used home remedies since hospitals were too risky. Honey, black cumin seed, and simple herbs became his main medicine. He told his family to store dried fruit and lemon not just as food, but because he thought they helped his health. He avoided modern doctors, but sometimes trusted aides brought him simple drugs. In one letter, he even asked for toothpaste and medicine for weak gums. He worried about fever, infections, and even small pains. In hiding, a toothache could feel like a real threat. He also watched the health of his family. He told his wives to boil water. He made sure children washed their hands before lessons. He even wrote advice about food, warning not to eat too much meat or sugar. To him, a strong body was linked to strong faith. But weakness still showed. Some days he rested on a plain cot. He walked slowly in the courtyard when pain struck. Aides noticed he sometimes looked pale and quiet. Even then, he kept working. Sick or not, he dictated letters, fixed drafts, and led prayers. He refused to admit weakness openly. To his family and his followers, he said illness was a test, something to endure. The world saw a fighter. But inside the walls, much of his day was spent fighting a slower battle, the decline of his own body. For Osama bin Laden, Danger came not only from soldiers or spies, but from signals. He believed phones, computers, and even small talks could bring drones over his roof. Silence became his shield. No one in the Abbottabad compound could use the internet or a cell phone. If a visitor made a call, they were never asked back. Radios and TVs were banned, except for short news clips brought by messengers. Even batteries and wires were watched in case they gave off signals. He worried about planes above. If the sound of an engine stayed too long, he told everyone to go inside. Curtains were checked, lights turned off. Trash was burned in the yard, so no one outside could guess who lived there. His letters showed how deep this fear was. He scolded followers for using email. He warned leaders not to appear in videos with landmarks behind them. He even told them how to travel unseen, switch cars often, stop using phones, never trust hotels. Inside the house, this fear ruled daily life. Children were told not to speak loudly near windows. Women were told not to look outside. At night, he sometimes walked the halls, listening for strange sounds. This silence wasn't calm, it was pressure. Every word, every light, every step outside the walls felt dangerous. For the man who once shouted to the world, his last years were spent whispering and listening for steps that might already be too close. The 2nd of May 2011. For Osama bin Laden, it started like any other. The Abbottabad compound was quiet. He prayed before dawn, spoke with one of his wives, and later sat in his upstairs room with papers spread out around him. Nothing in those hours showed it would be his last day. His children walked through the courtyard, his guards stayed at their posts. He read, wrote, and rested the same way he had for years. Outside the walls, neighbors saw only simple things: a man tending rabbits, laundry hanging to dry. But high above the city, American helicopters were already coming. Special forces had crossed into Pakistan's airspace, flying low and unseen. Their target was the house with the tall walls, no phones, no internet, and burned trash. By midnight local time, the quiet ended. Explosions shook the gates, shouts echoed through the halls. Bin Laden moved to the top floor, where he lived with his family. Shots rang out on the stairs. Moments later, the man the world had hunted for 10 years was found in his room. A short burst of gunfire ended his life. In less than 40 minutes, it was finished. His body was taken. The compound was left in chaos, filled with papers, computers, and frightened survivors. For years, his life had been about control rules, silence, and order. But on that night, the walls he built to protect himself became the walls that trapped him. Osama bin Laden lived as the world's most wanted man, yet his final years were not marked by power or movement, but by a narrow daily routine. For all the speeches that once echoed from mountains, his last decade was spent inside courtyards and small rooms, moving between prayer mats, garden paths, and handwritten notes. He tried to rule an organization through couriers and scraps of paper. He lectured his family on diet, on study, on silence. He checked windows, corrected drafts, and kept lists. His empire shrank to schedules and whispers. And still, he believed the small things mattered: when to turn on a light, how to hide laundry, which path a courier should take. He thought control could keep him safe. In truth, it only delayed the end. His death did not end the movement he inspired, but it exposed the strange gap between the image and the reality. Outside, he was seen as a figure who threatened nations. Inside, he lived like a prisoner of his own walls. The legacy of his routine is not just in the history books, but in the contrast it left behind. A man who once commanded armies ended his life rationing paper, growing vegetables, and pacing the same small courtyard. What began as a global mission ended as a life measured in minutes, in rules, in silence. And maybe that is the final truth. Osama bin Laden built his life around control. But in the end, even his routine could not save him. Osama bin Laden's days were ruled by silence, prayer, and control, but they ended in the one moment he could not plan. What part of his hidden daily life surprised you most? Tell us in the comments, and if you want more stories that look past the headlines and into the daily lives of history's most infamous people, don't forget to like and subscribe. More routines, more history, more lives, revealed one day at a time.